Today's story is about when the subscriber who sent in this story convinced his younger brother and his friends that Siren Head was real and then pulled a massive prank on them, and it was quite funny. Leave a like in the video to claim your free nothing, subscribe, and let's jump right into it. So we're going to call the subscriber Owen. I got that name from the comment section down below, so leave a name in the comments you want me to use. Anyways, right, so this all happened because Owen wanted to get revenge on his little brother, and his little brother, we're going to call him Steve, but I might just refer to him as the little brother. Anyways, right, so a couple days ago, Steve did something against the subscriber Owen that made Owen pretty mad. So essentially, right, Owen had a pretty decently large schoolwork assignment that he had to do, and the family only had one computer that they kind of all used, and essentially, right, Steve decided to kind of hog the computer for the entire day playing Minecraft the entire time, when Owen really just needed to get on for a little bit to just, to finish up a Word document or whatever to, turn into school. And for some reason, right, Steve was just not letting him get on, and, Steve and Owen's parents were out for a little bit, so they weren't able to, kick Steve off, and Steve would refuse to, to let Owen on even for a second. And for that reason, right, Owen was only able to get on and, edit his Word document for school only for a little bit, very late at night. And for that reason, the document wasn't that good, and Owen didn't get the greatest grade that he wanted, and probably not as good of a grade that he would have gotten if he was able to get on earlier. So for that reason, right, Owen is pretty upset, Owen is pretty mad, and he wants to get revenge against Steve, his little brother. And, Owen's a couple years older, and I think Owen's in 4th grade or whatever, Steve might be in 2nd or 1st. But anyways, right, Owen knows that Steve is having friends over in a couple days, so he sits down in his room and thinks to himself, I gotta pull a prank on Owen, or on Steve. I gotta get him back somehow. Anyways, right, so Owen the subscriber was sitting in his room, and he's thinking to himself, I need to get back at Steve, I need to figure out a way. And he was sitting there, and then a little bit of an idea started to cross his mind. He remembered that he saw not too long ago on the internet this urban legend of the Siren Head. Basically, if you don't know, it's this big scary monster thing that appears and makes this very distinctive sound. If you want to go look it up, that's totally up to you. I don't want to play it if it's too scary for you guys. But anyways, right, it's a pretty cool internet legend, but it's also a pretty scary one as they go. And Owen was sitting there, he's like, okay, why did I think of this? Why did my brain make me think of oh, I should think of this for the prank or whatever. And then it came to Owen. He knew exactly what he needed to do. Step 1 was wait, because he had to wait until Steve had his friends over. And also, while he was waiting, set up the proper equipment and get together the story for part 2. Next, part 2. When Steve and his friends come over, casually start talking about Siren Head to them, and then kind of convince them that Siren Head is real. And even if they aren't totally convinced that Siren Head is real, and they're like, oh, you're just messing with us, at least remind them or make sure that they know what his distinctive sound sounds like, so that when they hear that sound, they'll be alerted. Step 3, wait until very late at night. Because one thing that, Owen knew was that his parents were not going to be back for quite a while, right? Even though, kids were coming over, sleeping over at the house. For some reason, all the parents were okay with them kind of just chilling there. I mean, I can't really explain that part of the story, but it is what it is. So basically, right, make it late at night so they've all gone to bed, but before the parents get back. And during that time period, sneak out of bed. I mean, he'll be sleeping in a different room than the other kids in the sleepover, right? Kind of quietly get out of bed and then play the siren song, the Siren Head song. It's very distinctive. It's very creepy. If you've not already listened to it, you can go ahead and listen to it if you want to. But anyways, right, that was the plan to prank them, and let's see if it actually worked out. So anyways, right, Steve and his friends, a couple days later, Steve has his friends over, and at this point, right, they're kind of sitting at the kitchen table. Their mom made pizza, pre-made or whatever. Speaking of pizza, I'm pretty hungry, but the mom made pizza beforehand just so that they'd have something to eat when they got back, because his mom was out for the moment. And they're sitting there, and Owen casually drops oh, you guys know what Siren Head is? Some of them, shake their head no. A few of them nod their head yes, and they're like, oh, it's that thing on, the internet or whatever. And Owen is like, oh, you know it's not just a thing on the internet, right? It's actually, legit. And one of the kids is very convinced. He's like, oh, are you serious? And the other one's like, no, dude. Like, it's obviously fake. It's like, it's online. It's just an internet meme. And, so Owen has kind of predicted this. Owen was aware that they probably wouldn't have just been convinced just by the fact of him saying, oh, Siren Head is real, especially if they knew there was an internet meme. And Owen, turned to the guys, and he's like, I thought that was I felt the same way before. He's like, I saw it on the internet, and I thought it was kind of spooky, but I didn't think much more of it until my friend. Do you remember Ben? Once again, I'm just using Ben as it's. If you've been on the channel for a while, Ben is the name I use whenever I don't have a name. So he's like, remember my friend Ben? And essentially, right, Steve and his friends kind of nodded because Ben was, one of Owen's friends back in the day, but Ben had to move way across the country. And, Owen was looking at them. He's like, Ben and I talked a couple days ago, and he was telling me about how out in the country, because he was kind of in the countryside, a lot more like they were living in more of a city, or Ben moved to the countryside, and Owen was like, he was telling me about some stuff that was happening out there. And he said that, one night he was walking out in the fields, and he was kind of late. He was out just kind of messing around, playing out there because he used to be in the city too because he lived where, Owen was living. And Ben was having some fun exploring the countryside, but he also let time kind of slip away. And if you guys don't know, when the sun sets really quickly, and it was getting dark. And Owen looks at them. He's like, and then he said that, he heard this sound, the siren sound. And it was kind of this long, monotonous wailing that kind of, he heard it before. And that's when he realized that it sounded just like something he saw online. And he got really freaked out because that's a pretty scary sound to hear when it's getting dark out late at night. And he's like, oh, wow, I'm kind of freaking out. So right, Ben, he starts running back. And as he's running back home, he makes a wrong turn, and he finds himself in this, a big abandoned field or whatever. And, he looks out in the distance, and it's a very flat field. In the middle of the country, there's a lot of kind of flat terrain. And he looks very far down, and he sees on the horizon this big, long, lanky figure that had kind of this siren head and had to be at least 50, 60 feet tall. Of course, right, Ben immediately ran in the other direction, and after, a lot of panicked running, he eventually found his way home. And let me just say, Ben did not go wandering after dark after that time. So Owen finished up telling that story, which if you don't know, that story was, he fabricated it to make it more believable. And the one kid who was, kind of snarky and, he's obviously an internet thing, this kid was still like, yeah, right, I think your friend Ben is just trying to mess with you. But obviously, the other kids were really they're all shaken and oh my god, they all look kind of nervous. And even the kid that was putting on a front about being yeah, man, that's obviously fake. Truth is, he was also pretty scared and rattled by the story. Even if he wasn't 100% convinced by it, let me just say that if he was to, and I'm not saying he does, wink wink, but if he was to hear the siren head noise later that night, right, when it was 11 o'clock and it's all dark outside, yeah, he might have been a little bit scared, even if he didn't believe in it, quote unquote, So anyways, right, on to part 2, the actual prank. Real quick, drop a like and then comment Siren Head down below. That's kind of the secret word of the day. I just like seeing how many people made it this far, and I'll try and heart a bunch of those comments. So yeah, comment Siren Head, and maybe even comment it 1 or 2 times just to make it easier or more likely that I'll see it and give you a heart. Anyways, back to part 2 of the story, which is the actual prank. Anyways, right, so Owen doesn't say anything else about Siren Head for the rest of the night, as he doesn't want to make it seem suspicious, right? Because he already had a pretty big, spiel about it. He doesn't want to make it seem like he's trying to pull a prank or set up for a prank or whatever. And Steve and his friends have a decently good night, and yeah, eventually they get tired around 10:30, and they go to their bed. They turn off the lights. However, right, when Owen went back to his room, he turned off the lights to make it seem convincing, but what he actually did was he snuck out of his room and began to prepare for the massive prank. So essentially, right, Owen gets out of his bed, sitting in there for 10 minutes or so, goes into his closet as quietly as possible, and gets out a speaker. He goes in, pairs the speaker with his phone, and as quietly as possible, walks downstairs, and then walks down to the basement. He goes into the basement, and he places the speaker down there, make sure that the lights kind of like has a kind of a hidden place, but he kind of knows that if scary sounds are coming from the basement, bro, no one is investigating that. No one is investigating the basement, dude. That's the last place they're gonna go. But anyways, right, he puts the speaker in the basement and makes sure his phone is still connected and walks upstairs. You might be thinking, oh, what if his phone disconnects? He actually tested it the day before. That was part of part one, making sure that everything worked. And sure enough, for some reason, right, maybe the way his house was like the walls were thin enough, or his phone was good enough, or some combination of the two, his phone stayed connected even when he went back into his room. And so he goes back into his room, shuts his door quietly, locks it, sits in bed, and then goes to his phone and gets up a file. I don't know if it's on Spotify, SoundCloud, if he downloaded a file or something. And sure enough, right, the Siren Head sounds, the really creepy ones that like he was talking about earlier in that fake story he told to like kind of like prep them for the Siren Head or whatever. He had a copy of that, and sure enough, he played it. And so like it wasn't super blaring loud because it was from the basement, but it was loud and clear enough that, you know, they could hear exactly what was going on. So, right, Steve and his friends were asleep, but they were starting to wake up. You know, Owen was sitting in his room and he heard like Steve and his friends from his room start to whisper, start to talk, and they were like, oh my God, what is that? What's that noise? Like, what are we hearing, right? And sure enough, right, you know, Owen is sitting in his bed, kind of like pretending to be asleep as he hears his door slam open. And Steve is like, Owen, what's going on? And Owen kind of like gets up, pretends to be extra groggy as if he was just awoken from like a pretty good nap. And Owen's like, man, what are you talking about? And Steve's like, listen, I think it's the Siren Head you were talking about earlier. I didn't want to believe you. I didn't want to believe your friend, but I think he's telling the truth. I think Siren Head is in our basement. So it's Steve and Steve's friends, you know, all standing in Owen's room, and Owen pretends to be extra brave and is like, all right, I'll go down and investigate. Like, I'll get to the bottom of this. So Owen starts confidently walking down the stairs towards the source of the noise. And sure enough, right, it was getting louder and louder as they got close to the basement. And Steve was like, don't go down there. I don't know what's down there. And Owen's like, don't worry about it. I'm just going to go check it out. And sure enough, Owen opens the door to the basement, walks down it, and like slams the door. And like, you know, Steve and his friends were kind of confused. And at that point, Owen starts going, Steve, help me. As if like, I don't know, Siren Head was trying to get him or something. So at this point, right, Steve and his friends are like, ah. So eventually, like, Steve is trying to figure out, like, do we run? Do we do something? And Steve's like, I can't let him. We have to go down. So sure enough, Steve and his friends go down there and they start venturing down. The basement is completely like dark. And, you know, because the thing is, the light switch is in a really unfortunate position. The light switch is all the way down in the basement, which is like just kind of like crappy design. But like, hey, man, not much you can do. So they're going down into the dark basement with the sounds of Siren Head as loud as they possibly could be. And no sound of Owen, no sighting of Owen. And Steve and his friends are just down there and they're kind of like cowering. And then all of a sudden, bah! Owen jumps out. He's like, gotcha. Next time, don't hog the computer, bro. Subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a like on the video and then click one of the 4 videos on screen right now if you want to support the channel. Bye.